Welcome to this episode of Two Old Sexperts talking sexuality and disabilities. I am one of your hosts, Sean McGill, joined by Sharon Potter. Today, we will be talking about the basics of sex education. Focus first on body parts and functions as much as we can, and how we introduce the ideas and concepts to the people that we support to help them begin to navigate aspects of sexuality. So I know for me, I use drawings and I make sure that people know what their private body parts are. And we talk about the language they use and try to teach the correct terminology because people use all kinds of slang. And for me, it's important not just from the sexuality perspective, but from the abuse prevention and safety side of things too. And we've talked a little bit about how our folks are 7 times more likely to be victims of sexual abuse. And so if there is an incident and it does get reported or known to be reported, we want to make sure people can identify these body parts and use as much of the correct terminology as possible so that people pay attention to it. So I'm curious to hear from you, Sharon, how you approach some of these things.
Yeah. Well, when I think about, the words that we use in a lot of the slang terms, I also think about childish terms like poo-poo and pee-pee, that sort of thing. So all of that's not accurate. We don't need to say that it's bad or wrong, but we need to say this is another word and this is the correct one. Well, when I do basic sex education, I start with body parts, and I have actually four line drawings, a male and a female adult, and a male female child. And they have all their significant body parts there. And I begin at what's the same for the males or females, and, the eyes and the ears and the nose and the hands and the legs and what they're all called. But then we get to the body parts that are different. And I use line drawings because I think for, as you said, 7%. And I think for people who have had some kind of sexual trauma, it's not always a good idea to have a film of actual human beings because it can re-traumatize them. And there are some films that David Hinsberger's films that don't do that sort of thing, but we'll talk about that another time. But I do use the line drawings. And I ask them what's the same and what's different, and with between an adult and a child. And that's really important too, because sometimes people end up with children and they're not really getting, they know they're kids, but they're not really getting the difference, that they shouldn't touch them or hug them or whatever. So I think it's important to emphasize that. And then we talk about what's different in the male and the female, and we'll point to the chest area on a man, and he might have hair on his chest, and a woman will have breasts, and so we'll name what they are. Man's front of a man's body is called a chest, and a woman's is their breasts. And then the buttocks, as they'll say, the butt, which you kind of sit on when we talk about function. Anus, they both have an anus. And we talk a little bit about what happens there. And then a penis. Men have a penis, women have vaginas. And testicles. Males have testicles, and females have ovaries. You can't see them, but they're in a way similar to testicles. They're inside the body. And then one of the things that men have is sperm, and women have eggs. And that always is kind of an interesting thing to talk about, like a chicken, kind of, yeah, sort of tiny little chicken eggs. But I go into much more detail about, how conception happens too. And then we talk about what they call things. I'll ask them, what do you call this part of the body? And I have to say, there are terms I am not comfortable with, and I never will be, but I have to get out of my own way. And I'm never going to shame someone or tell them it's inappropriate or wrong. For instance, we'll look at the breasts, and some people will say boobs, and some people will say tits. And, I'll say, yes, they're both correct. And they're also called breasts. And then the buttocks, this is what is an ass or a butt. Yep, that's right. But they're also buttocks. And the anus, usually what they'll say is the butthole, which is true. And then vagina. again, words that I don't particularly like, but that's frequently called a pussy or a cunt. And the penis, a dick, a prick, or a cock. They're the most frequent words that I hear. And they're all words that people use, but it's important for us to give them the words that are proper. If there's not proper, that if you have a problem with that part of your body, or you have a question about that part of your body, the terms you should use are penis and vagina and anus and buttocks and breasts or chest, whatever. And I think that's really important. And then we talk about what each thing does, what's its function. Well, breasts are, I mean, they feed babies for one thing. They can feed babies. A milk comes out of them. And it's very pleasant to have them touched when you're having sex or someone you care about to touch your breast. It feels really very nice. And then your buttocks, they're the same for everyone. You sit on them. The anus is where the poop comes out, and it's called feces, but that's where it comes out. And it actually is what feces is what you've eaten and put into your mouth, and it goes to different parts of your body to make you stronger. And what's left over, that's what comes out. That's what the feces is, or the poop. And that can also be used in sexual acts as well. The vagina, on women, it's several things. That's where if she's involved in having sex, that's with a male, she can have penetration into her vagina by the penis. That's also where, when she menstruates, which is about once a month, that women have bleed from their vagina. It's also where babies come out. So it's a very important part of a woman's body. It has a lot of very important functions. And then the penis has several functions as well. It's where a man will pee through out of the end of his penis. And there's also another thing that happens. There's something that comes out of there called sperm or ejaculation or cum. And it comes out during a sexual act. And when later on, when we're talking about babies and how babies are conceived, we can go into more detail about that. But that's where the eggs that are inside the woman's body in the ovaries and the sperm from the man come together, and they can begin the growth of a baby. But we get into more detail and more illustrations too, line drawings to describe that. So, I think it's and for staff also to be able to use those terms, and not, if someone uses a term that's uncomfortable to them, or they don't like, or they think is like totally gross, just don't do that. Don't shame somebody. Just say that's right, but here are other words, and be sure to be kind about it, and informative. And there's also a nice exercise working with staff where you can write one word on a sheet of paper and put it on a wall or on a board, and ask people to just roam around the room and write every word they've ever heard that means the same thing. It's pretty funny, actually, but it's also educational, and it makes people laugh. And that's laughter. If I've learned anything from David Hinsberger, is that humor is priceless when it comes to talking about sex, because no, people are uncomfortable.
It is very uncomfortable. And you hit on the fact that we have to use terms with a straight face and sincerity that we're very uncomfortable with, because people do need to have this information, but we also work with people who can be quite impulsive, and walking up to someone and saying you have really nice tits, that certainly won't get you a first date.
No, it
I
will
have
not. And we've probably seen that too many times when people are doing that. And I wanted to give an example of the way we give information too. When we're talking about giving people information about body functions, it's really important to be very specific, and to ask the person after you've given the information to give it back to you. And I liked what you said in our last session about they're the professor and you're the student. And so tell me, what we just talked about. And one example, this was not a person I worked with, but a dear friend of mine had this gentleman that he was referred to him. And he was in it. The gentleman was in his 40s and had mild intellectual disability. He had a part-time job. He lived alone. He had a lot of support, but he lived alone with his cat, and he loved his cat. And staff reported that they thought he was into bestiality because he was trying to have sex with his cat, which is, on many levels, a difficult thing to even imagine. So he got referred to my friend, and in the process of trying to figure out what was going on, he asked him about what he knew about sex and whatever, what this was going on here. Well, what we, the professionals, taught him at some place in his history was a liquid comes out of a man's penis and it makes babies. Well, that's true, but that's not the whole truth. So what he was doing was trying to urinate on his cat so she would have kittens. Well, it's just, I mean, there's some humor to it, but it wasn't funny because they took his cat away and he was heartbroken. He didn't know what he did wrong. And he was doing what we taught him to do. I mean, the person who taught him this didn't say, there's semen that comes out of the penis and there's urine that comes out of the penis, and they're very different things. But that didn't happen, and if he had explained it back to the teacher, the person that taught him, he would have understood. But that part didn't happen, and I think that kind of thing can happen frequently if we're not absolutely clear in our language and we're not absolutely sure that the person understands. And the only way we'll be sure is if they will explain it back to us.
Yeah, I remember Keela Gary saying once, well, probably more than once, but it stuck out of my head that we make mistakes in the name of helping. So if we're
Exactly.
trying to be helpful, we need to make sure we ask a lot of questions. Play Columbo, act as if you know nothing, and keep asking questions so that you understand where this person is and you meet them where they are and
Yep.
to give them the information.
Yep.
I don't think anyone intended to hurt that man, right? They
No,
were the
not
best
at
they
all.
could. But
Yeah,
this is where we can make some big mistakes by not asking the questions and withholding really important
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And it's the biggest problem, I think, is us. We, the people who are trying to help, as you just really said, and to be able to use language that we're not comfortable with and be sure that we're getting the information to the person. The other thing that we talk about, and I think we'll be doing another whole other program on sex and intimacy, which is so important to distinguish between the two, because you can just simply have a sex act. You can masturbate alone, and that would be a sex act. You can have sex with another person that you don't really know or care about. You're just enjoying the feeling of the sex act. And then there's intimacy, which you can have with someone that you're not sexually involved with. They're the person that you want to be with when you're happy or you're sad. And that's a whole different thing. Or you can have both. If you're lucky enough, you can have both. And that's a really lovely thing. But I think it's important to distinguish between the two.
And
Um,
that's actually a question that I ask people when I first with them. People get referred to us because of challenges with sexuality or challenges with sexual behaviors. And one of the questions I'll ask, what is your goal? Is your goal to be in a relationship, be in a relationship with the same person? Or is your goal to just have sex? Because immediately I'm starting to tease out and distinguish what is this about intimacy or is this about sex? And neither is wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and for the people that we support most, I was going to say many, but most of them are not going to have lifelong partners. And so they may have, a few partners along the way or casual partners, and that's okay. But just know what you're doing. That's true of any population, including people with disabilities. And I had another example that I'd like to give. I got a call about a gentleman who was stealing female underwear. If they went into any store, Target or what have you, or if he was visiting his family, he would go into the female's bedroom and grab underwear and steal it. And the staff was getting afraid that he was going to harm them. Now, I don't know how that connection happened, but they were getting afraid of him. So I went and met with him. And clearly, I think he was probably a transgender person. And he really wanted female underwear. So I said to the staff, why don't you just buy him female underwear? And I said, you don't have to go to Victoria's Secret and get some, flaming red lacy thing. Go and get, cotton, pale green or yellow tank top and soft panties, and, just see if that makes him more comfortable. Well, that was the end of the problem. He had his own stuff, and he was, he was perfectly fine, but it was all they were in a turmoil about it. Oh my God, what do we do? And we can't do that. And he's stealing this, but it never occurred to them, why don't you just get him what he's asking for? He wasn't verbally asking for it, but he was asking for it for sure. And that worked out really, really well. But people are uncomfortable with that. Or, someone who will say to their staff, I'm gay. Okay. And I want to meet somebody. Where can I meet somebody? And the first thing they'll think about is like going to a gay bar. Well, I mean, that might be okay, but that might not be. And there are support groups all over the state, and where you can go. I mean, I was involved with a group in Harrisburg for many years, and we had several times we had people come with their staff to a meeting at Common Roads, and it was awesome. I mean, it was just wonderful. They could ask any question, and there were people that they could relate to, and it was unconditional support, so it made a difference. But people, again, just accepting who we all are together, I think is so important. And you have puppets that I think are pretty
I
awesome.
use the anatomically correct dolls. Now they were a little bit pricey, but
Yes.
they have served a great purpose. And we have actually used Zoom like we're using Zoom now, and we captured the video of talking through what people can do together sexually and demonstrating that with the
Yep.
dolls,
Yep.
because it's a great way to visually teach and talk through different sex acts. And we're going to get into sexual consent later in one of the other podcasts, but we want to make sure, one, people know and understand different sex acts. I don't know everything there is to know about sex. I don't want to know everything there is to know about it, but we need to make sure people know what they're comfortable engaging in and what they want to abstain from. But that also sort of cues us into, is a person attracted to the opposite sex, or are they sort of painfully aware that they're not? And we have to work through those things first and foremost. That's an area of sexual consent. And you've touched on things like pregnancy. Does a person know how to avoid unwanted pregnancy? Sexually transmitted diseases or infections. That's a big thing right now. That's a
Oh,
big thing in the neurotypical population.
yep.
But then looking at other things like, do you know about sex in the law, privacy with sex acts, and the abuse prevention and safety? And like I said, we're going to get into that in more detail. But that first one of understanding different sex acts is
Yes.
important.
Yeah. And the fact that you just mentioned STIs, it's interesting because I had a situation with a young woman who had an STI, and she said, but I didn't have sex. And it was sort of odd. What she meant was she didn't have penile vaginal sex. She had oral sex. And she didn't consider that having sex. But of course it is. And that's how she got the STI. And so we really do need to talk about all of that and explain it to people who nobody's talking to about this kind of specific stuff. It's
One of the
just,
things, Sharon, you taught me too is really look at and evaluate how we, all people, learned about sex. And I remember talking to you yesterday and telling you the story of my recollection of that. I think it was ninth grade. I know distinctly I was in high school because I can picture the room as clear as anything. That's where I had English class. And they separated boys and girls. And as a person who knew already then, long ago, I didn't identify as the sex I was born with, that was already painful and awkward. But I just recall them talking about menstruation. That was the big thing, menstruation. And they gave us this packet on menstruation and what to expect, with a tampon that looked like it was some type of TNT or something, and this maxi pad that could have been put on an elephant. And I remember riding my bike home from school, because I either walked or rode my bike usually. And I tossed that packet in the shrubs and wanted nothing to do with it ever again. But I was sneaky. And I remember, if my mother listens to this, she's going to cringe. My father had the Joy of Sex book in
oh,
our
yeah.
china closet. I remember hiding beside the sofa in front of that china closet and looking and reading about sex. That's how I learned.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful, though. In the china closet, that's no surprise. Behind a platter, probably. Yeah, and a lot of people, they learn from the talk, or a class in school, or friends, or a partner, but a lot of people learn from their own abuse, and it's a negative experience. And certainly the people that we support, I think that's a fairly high percentage. One of the things that I sometimes use are little, they're not clay. They're kind of a combination of clay and plastic. And I make little dolls, I can hold them in my hands. They're small, fairly small. I make two males and two females, and they're anatomically correct also. And one of the males has a beard because I like beards, but but they're also, I made them so they look ridiculously funny, and that helps, because there they are. I was teaching a class of adults with intellectual disabilities, and there was a young woman in the class who also had selective mutism. And I had these two males, two females, and people could show me what they could talk about something that they happened, or they had a question, and they would either point to something or show me with the two dolls. And she picked up a male doll and a female doll, and she had one in her hand flat in front of her, and she had the other one, and she slammed it on top of the female over and over and over and over, and actually smashed the little creatures that I'd made, um, and started to cry and said, I was raped, I was raped, I was raped, I was raped. And that was, she had selective mutism. So she was, she never told anybody. And the fact that she could actually, and we had done, several people had acted things out with the dolls before. So she knew that was something to do. But yeah, I mean, and she just kept that inside her for, I don't know how long, years for sure. But I think anything that we can use that helps people get to their own trauma or their own understanding of, what's happened in their life, and what can happen to them in the future. Because, the messages that you get when I work with adult, well, when I work with staff, I was going to say, but it would work with anyone. I break people into groups and say, what messages did you get as children about sex? Well, it's within a minute there's laughter because the messages were ridiculous. And don't have sex till you're married. Well, I mean, today a lot of people aren't getting married, and certainly the people we support, very few are. But I just think it's important to be able to give people information in a way, whatever, any way possible, that they'll understand it. And if they ask 1,000 questions, then answer the questions. Just answer every single question. I mean, you don't have to get into personal things. Like if they ask you personal things about yourself, I don't think you have to do that. I did have one gentleman who was, um, he had just come out of jail. He wasn't in for a long time, a couple months. Well, that would be a long time for me, but he'd done some inappropriate things, and I was meeting with him. It was a follow-up meeting, and he was doing really well, and he was a nice guy, really nice guy. So we talked about, where he was going, what he was doing, and what he had in place for himself to handle his own behavior. And I said, do you have any questions? And he said, only one. I'm pretty good, but I guess it would be wrong to kiss you, right? And I said, that's right.
Right.
But he was grateful for what we had talked about. And that's another thing I think is important. When I start doing a training with folks, I say there is nothing that you can ask me or tell me that I'm going to be upset about. So any question that you have is absolutely fine. And that helps too, because people know that they've said things in the past and they've been told not to say that. Don't talk about that. That's private.
I
It's a,
usually add the caveat, if you ask me something I'm not comfortable answering, I'll just tell you I'm not comfortable. That's a little too personal for me.
yeah, yeah,
And that has helped. But one of the things also that you have taught me, this is really about the teachings of Sharon Potter over the years, is we not only have to provide information, but we have to do it in a way that people feel safe and they feel comfortable, because
yes,
people will disclose things that they've never shared with other
yeah,
people. And I know folks have done that a lot with you because you've been that person who's talking about this stuff, but you're doing it in a way that you're maintaining empathic connection and helping them feel safe to talk
yes,
about things.
yeah, yeah. There's nothing more important. Having had some experiences as a young child with sexual abuse, I understand it, and I was fortunate enough to learn from it. But many people aren't. I mean, they carry it. Like, if you asked who they are, they might say, "I'm this, I'm that," and then they might say, "And I've been sexually abused." It's like it it keeps them down, it drags them down, and that's part of their identity. And it doesn't have to be, it can be, I mean, it's always going to be there, of course. It's important to be able to move forward and understand the whys of what happened to you, and how to protect yourself from it happening again. And that's huge with us, because people who depend on someone else to any degree, I mean, they're literally dependent on someone, to care for them in some way. And I'm a hugger. I mean, there's no question about that. But we cannot be hugging and touching people all the time that we support. I mean,
Right.
if we can do that, anybody can. How are they to distinguish that? So it's one thing to shake hands, or if it's someone you really know well, give them a hug on the shoulder or whatever. But a total stranger, to go up and hug them, it's not okay. I almost said appropriate. Oh goodness.
And you hit on the point. If you rely on someone to provide you with care, any level of care, I consider you being more vulnerable, whether that's a person with a disability, an elderly person, or a child. And I think that's
Right.
why I've always had an affinity for elderly people, spending time in nursing homes, but you're vulnerable. And so, again, this is why it's so vital that we're teaching these stuff. You're never going to forget the trauma. There's no
Right.
magic that makes those memories disappear, but you're trying to learn from them and not let the trauma control your life and lock you into that identity. So
Exactly.
working through those things, this is all, and we said sexuality is such a huge, broad topic. And we're trying to cover sort of the 101 when we begin working with people around sexuality.
Exactly. Yeah. And I always think that if you don't dig down into that trauma and figure it out, you have a 40 or 50 or 80 or whatever year old that at times something happens in their life and they become 4 or 5 years old and they acting like a child, temper tantrum, what have you. But as my husband used to say, not everyone wants to peel back the onion skin. And I understand that too, because the pain can be so deep. But we can help people through, we just can't help them out. It's a process. And one to be, very proud to be part of the process and see people go from, I mean, I did follow up with that young woman who was had selective mutism, and she was really doing well, so getting the support she needed.
Recovery can happen if these bad things have
Absolutely.
happened to you.
Yeah.
And finding non-threatening ways to present the information, even though there is a likelihood it could trigger a strong emotional response in people, but
Yes.
using some humor along the way too. And the Cookie Sutra, the book
Oh,
you
yes.
and I both use,
Oh, I
is
know.
a great illustration of different sex acts. And it's not people, it's cookies,
It's
you know.
Yeah, I love this book. I was with a group of women recently, and I took it along, and I didn't think I was going to get it back. They were all so excited about it. But for anyone who does not know about the Cookie Sutra, it's a book of using two cookies, gingerbread cookies, in different sexual positions. And it's really adorable and cute, and it's educational. But it's not just to use, like, to teach about sex. If someone has a stroke or a physical disability, it shows positions that will be more comfortable for you. It doesn't mean that you can't have sex anymore if you lost a leg, or whatever it might be, because there are all kinds of positions, and the names of them are really quite adorable that they've given to the cookie positions. And there's a great cookie recipe at the end. So yeah, I really like this very much. This little cookie super book. So a couple of people took the name down. They were going to order it.
It's very inexpensive and you can find it right on Amazon.
Yes, and I did give it to my kids for Christmas one year, I think. My kids are adults.
You have to be the coolest mom in the world.
I had one of my kids call me once because a granddaughter asked a question, and my daughter's very well informed about things, but she said, "You better call Granny with that one."
And how many kids can say that, you know?
Yeah,
I had to
yeah,
call my granny. Meanwhile, I remember I just could not imagine my grandparents being sexual. It was sort of traumatic to even consider that.
Oh my
But
goodness.
these are all things we can look back and laugh at, because some people are more comfortable talking about this stuff than other people are. And
Yeah,
that's something else I tell to parents and staff. If you're not comfortable, it's going to bleed out into what you're trying to accomplish. So find someone who isn't going to give misinformation.
exactly. I did have a situation, was a group home, and there was a young man that had offended. He was a sex offender, and he was doing really, really well. And I was there to see him. But one of the staff people, I said, "How's he doing?" And she said, I guess he's okay, but I can't stand to look at him. And I said, What? She said, Yeah, I was abused as a kid and I just can't stand to look at him. And I said, Well, all due respect, but you need to get another job, because any goodness and good works that have happened here and he's moving forward, one look at him with cutting your eyes at him and you've undone any progress that he's made. And please do get some help for yourself too. I
Yeah,
mean,
you can't build a therapeutic relationship if you're hanging on to that. But if you're hanging on to that, you're going to be re-traumatizing yourself every day.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And there are so many things. I know we're going to be, going into more detail about masturbation, I think, in the next one. And I mean, if there's anything that I don't think there's anything I've been called in more about than masturbation. Well, maybe that's second, actually. Um, but it's just and in general, I mean, when I talk about the penis again and what they do, and vagina, I do mention masturbation. That's partly what happens. And one of the things that I will say is it's normal, healthy, and private. And private, and they'll give examples. Well, it's your bedroom at night, whatever, and then you should never say a bathroom. You should say a private bathroom or your bathroom with the door closed because you don't want to go to McDonald's.
That is so
And
true. And we see that
that's
all
how.
the time.
Yes, absolutely. So we have to be very specific about these things. And I mean, some things that people just don't even think about, going into that kind of detail. But, you go out and, you're going out with two or three people from a group home and you're going here and you're going there and somebody's going into the bathroom and you have female staff and it's a male. I mean, you really have to be aware of all of the stuff that you're looking at. And, but it's so rewarding. I don't think I'd ever want to be doing anything else. I just love this work so much.
And that's why we have to keep you going so that we are learning as much as we can from you
Well,
and distributing it across the world too. Because
oh, that would be good. It's interesting when I talk to people my age and they ask me what I do, and I tell them, they look at me like I'm a Martian or something. But then we get talking, and they often will say, "Oh, I never thought about that. Where nobody ever told me that," and that's a shame. So what did they tell their kids? And then what did their kids tell their kids? And if you don't know it, you can't make it better. You can't help people along the line there. So
this generation, I feel, is at a serious disadvantage in many ways because I didn't have the internet. We had to go to the library and use the card catalog, for God's sake, to find any information.
yeah.
Kids today, they just have to type on a computer or a phone and they're pulling up all kinds of things. And we're going to talk about the internet. That's a whole separate
Oh,
podcast.
wow. Yeah.
But the misinformation that's on the internet, I mean, we hear this in politics all the time. It's true for sex also.
Yes.
And it's really frustrating for me to see that this stuff is allowed to be out there because it is damaging people.
It
I'm
is.
not talking just pornography. I'm talking about what is portrayed in terms of sexuality and intimacy. It's misinformation. So I tell parents too, because I work with a lot of younger kids, do you want the internet teaching your child about sex or do you want to teach your child about sex?
Yeah.
Because they're going to find it, they're going to look for it if you're not
Yeah.
teaching it.
Yeah. I remember when I have six kids and I had five teenagers at the same time. And they were always respectful of, people they were seeing and they knew a lot about sex because we talked to them about it. But I heard one of them say that there was a girl at school who was, I don't know, sleeping with, well, she wasn't sleeping. She was having sex. Yeah, they're different things. She was having sex with several of the guys in class, and I mean, they were talking about her in a negative way. And I mean, I don't even remember what they said, but I said, all right, everybody in the dining room, let's go in the dining room. And we sat down. And I remember one of the things I said was, you're seeing this young woman in a negative light because she's having sex with different people. And I said, can you imagine why that might be? Maybe she's thinking if somebody will hold her and love her for 5 minutes, that she's going to be okay. And is that the kind of person you want to diss? And I mean, I don't know what the situation was, but they were, four boys and two girls, and they just didn't think that what she was doing was hurting herself. And she was trying to, they needed to befriend her and help her to be better, not, point at her and say, shame on you. Yeah, the whole masturbation thing is fascinating. So I'm looking forward to that one.
We have lots of wonderful topics coming up. We have already set the calendar. We're just trying
Yeah,
to distribute two a month. I believe November is the only month where we have one because it gets complicated with the holiday season.
yeah,
So, we're going to be open if people have feedback or comments on what they would like to hear more about. We're receiving it. We want to receive that because we
yeah.
welcome.
Oh,
Uh,
that would be great. The feedback is it's so important. And we have some guests that will be on. I'm looking forward to that as well.
Absolutely. So, if there are other people who are out there doing this work, we want to hear from you because these are people that we want to pull in to share their information and knowledge as well, because that's what this is all about. It's getting
Exactly.
information out there
Yeah, exactly. We're all in this together for
because it
sure.
does take a village.
It does. It
Well,
does.
Sharon, it's been wonderful. Is there anything else that you feel would be vitally important for people to know a little bit more about when you're doing just basic sex ed 101?
Well, the only other thing is if a person asks a staff person a question, they should answer it. They should answer it. And if they don't, and if they're uncomfortable and it's awkward or whatever, they should say, I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out. And they should find someone that can answer it. Because if they just don't, that person may have some very important issue that they're concerned about, and they're not going to tell anybody. And we never want that to happen. We want to be able to have people go to the people that are supporting them and be supported. And we also want the staff, and I know we're going to spend time on that because I've met so many wonderful direct support professionals, and they'll often say, I'm carrying my own stuff around with me, and I don't want it to affect other people, but it's uncomfortable for me, and so we need to help them in every possible way that we can.
And I think that is definitely an area where we need to improve in that area too.
Yeah,
And so again, a part of me thinking about this podcast is to offer some of that support and direction to the direct care staff. But it takes the administration, wrapping the support around them to see that there's follow through and some change too.
yes, yeah. I did have at one point, in fact, I your anatomically correct dolls. I was going to use. Asked to there were some people that were having some difficulty. It was a small agency, but they were concerned about some issues, and I forwarded that to them and said that I would be happy to come and work with them. And they got back to me and said we're not allowed to talk about sex, yet they were asking me to come in and talk about sex.
Right.
And I mean, I was just sort of flabbergasted and said, I'll be happy to help, but all due respect, this is part of the problem. I mean, you've got to, if the problem is sexual, you've got to talk about the issue, and that would be sex. So
Yeah, so we have to amplify some discrepancies or barriers too, and start to slowly chip away at them
yes, yeah,
because there are barriers, not just sort of institutional barriers, but there are some political ones too that
right,
we have to chip away at for sure because it is burdening it's just carrying the problem even more. It's perpetuating it, but it's leaving people with feelings of shame and
absolutely.
fear
Hmm.
that just it's not only not okay, but it's unhealthy and counterproductive too.
Right. I was doing a visit with a gentleman once, and very capable guy and interesting. He made me a cup of tea and we were chatting, and I said to him at one point, do you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend? And he said, no. And I said, why not? And he said, because I'm retarded.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And it was just, and I said, well, that's no reason, and we don't use that word anymore, but I said, "You're a very interesting, capable guy." But his family, in order to protect him, is what, because I did speak to them, in order to protect him, they would say, "That's not for you." And so there he was, perfectly capable of having a relationship, but he didn't. And I think families often, in an effort to protect, limit people, don't give them sex education because then they'll want to do it. Well, they're adults with adult bodies, so they're going to want to do it.
Careful what you say. Be very careful what you say. And even nowadays, be careful what you write too, and where
Oh,
you put that. Because people do see things, and
yeah.
it's damaging. I saw this morning someone had posted something about, and I think it's again fake stuff, but a controversy in a school district because there was rumor or some post about a student wanted to urinate in a litter box, and there was this, as ridiculous as it sounds, and there were these comments about safety in the bathroom, safety in the bathroom, and my only response was, at what point, one, did being a cat become illegal? But two, I still have not heard of a cat or a transgender person who's raped or molested someone in the bathroom. See, I was using the cat thing to move it into the big issue that everyone hears about is
Exactly.
transgender people shouldn't use the bathroom.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That is a mental distortion. People just want to pee. No one is
Exactly.
trying to grab and snatch your children. No one's even interested in trying to sneak a peek. They literally just want to pee.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, or that it's a choice. That's the other thing. I had it when doing a presentation once. I don't even remember the group, but there were probably 20, 25 people in this group. And I had one of the kids from my group that I was facilitating with me, a young man, a gay man. And anyway, this woman stood up and when it was time for questions, and she said to me, "What do you do if you have a kid from a religious family that has a lot of faith in God and whatever, and they're choosing to be in your group and they don't want to go to church anymore and whatever? What do you tell them?" And I said, "Well, actually, that's fairly simple. I tell them that if they're in a relationship, they should never be abused by their partner, and they should never be abused by a church either. There are many that are supportive, period." Because this poor kid was going to services and being told that he was going to hell, and he believed it. And
Sounds
I
very
just,
familiar.
I
And
bet.
again, none of us wake up one day and say, "Yeah, I'd love to be something that people will hate us for, people will leave us for, and people might kill us for." Yeah, that
Yeah,
would be fantastic because I think that's really popular.
I know. I know.
But anyway, we'll be getting into more of those issues also. As always, it's a pleasure to see you
You
and
too.
you. I
You
feel
too.
like I could do this every morning over coffee, but
Oh, I wish we could.
thank you for joining us today for this episode of Two Old Sexperts talking sexuality and disabilities. Stay tuned for our next episode where we address the topic of masturbation.